So, good morning. Welcome to this biochemistry of cancer. And after completing the class, you should be able to correlate the reasons why we get cancer and how the cancer is transferred from one generation to another generation, or if the cancer can happen de novo, fresh, why it comes, what happens for the cancer to surface out. All these things you should be able to understand by continuously following this class. This is nothing but systematic acquisition of knowledge. And all this knowledge will be useful to you, and you will be a fruitful doctor to the community. Most of the people will get cancers towards the time of their flag end. And towards the flag end, what happens? That is the thing you have to know from these classes. For this, you have to understand the cell cycle regulation. So the term cell cycle regulation, it was proposed by two scientists, Howard and Pelk. So the cell cycle or cell division cycle, we call it, is a series of events usually that take place in cell that causes it to divide into two daughter cells. So these events include duplication of its DNA, that is known as DNA replication, and some of the organelles, and subsequently the partitioning of its cytoplasm and other components into two daughter cells. All this you know completely well before your 10th standard. So in cells with nuclei, that is, we call them as eukaryotes, like animal cells, plant cells, fungal cells, and protist cells. The cell cycle is divided into two main stages, interphase and mitotic, that is M phase. That M phase includes mitosis and cytokinesis. During the interphase, what happens? The cell grows, accumulates all the nutrients needed for mitosis, and replicates its DNA and some of the organelles. And during the mitotic phase, the replicated chromosomes, organelles, and cytoplasm separate into two new daughter cells. So this is the pictorial depiction of what is the cell cycle. So the phases, the eukaryotic cell cycle consists of four distinct phases: G1 phase, S phase. S phase means synthesis, phase of synthesis. G2 phase, that's collectively known as interphase, and M phase, mitosis and cytokinesis. This is a pictorial representation. And after the M phase, cytokinesis, producing the two daughter cells. So this is the simple pictorial description. You know all this right from your intermediate. So if you just pay a little bit of attention, you'll be understanding all this. So anaphase, metaphase, telophase, prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, all these things you know. And in the meiotic cell cycle, you know all these things. In the mitotic cell cycle, you know all these things. So prophase, chromatin condenses into chromosomes, and the nucleolus disappears. And then it enters the G2 phase. Cell growth will be taking place to some other extent, and cell duplicates DNA, and centrosome also duplicates. That is the interphase. G1 phase, that is the cell grows. And sometimes if it doesn't want to go into division, it may go into resting phase also. So the telophase, nuclear membrane will reform and nuclei reappear, and the chromosomes unwind into chromatin. Myosin 2 and actin filaments, the ring contract to cleave the cell into two. So these are the myosin 2 and actin filaments that will facilitate the cell to divide into two. M phase is itself composed of two tightly coupled processes: mitosis, in which the cell's nucleus divides, and cytokinesis, in which the cell's cytoplasm divides, forming two daughter cells. Activation of each phase is dependent on proper progression and completion of the previous one. Without completing the previous phase, activation of the second phase will not take place. That is the thing. So unless we clear the first year, we cannot enter the second year, just like that. So cells that have temporarily or reversibly stopped dividing are said to have entered a state of quiescence. So they will go into a quiet stage that is known as G0 phase, where it will accumulate, that's all. So resting phase is gap 0 phase. Abbreviation is G0 phase. So these are the representations of all these phases. So this is a phase where the cell has left the cycle and has stopped dividing. So next one is interphase, gap 1, that is represented as G1. Cells increase in size in gap 1, and G1 checkpoint controls the mechanisms and ensures that everything is ready for DNA synthesis. And synthesis phase, S phase. So DNA replication occurs during this phase. And gap 2, that is G2 phase. During this gap between DNA synthesis and mitosis, cell will continue to grow, and G2 checkpoint control the mechanisms and ensure that everything is ready to enter the mitosis phase for division. And cell division, mitosis, M phase. Cell growth stops at this stage, and cellular energy is focused on orderly division into 2 daughter cells. So the checkpoint in middle of the mitosis, metaphase checkpoint, ensures that the cell is ready to complete the cell division. Now you found out 3 checkpoints, but remember why these things are there. So regulation of the cell cycle involves processes crucial to the survival of a cell, including the detection and repair of genetic damage, as well as the prevention of uncontrolled cell division. These are the 2 most important things. So it should be able to detect and repair any genetic damage. That is one thing. And in the same manner, should be able to prevent uncontrolled cell division. That's why whenever a woman is pregnant, the gynecologist will tell, until 3 months, don't take any medicine. You take only folic acid and B12. If they are pure vegetarians, they will add B12. Otherwise, the pregnant mother should be going on taking folic acid so that it will correct the damages of repair of the genetic damages also will be taking place if you take folic acid. So the molecular events that control the cell cycle are ordered. They are in an orderly manner. They cannot just run here and there. And they are directional. They will go in only one direction. So each process occurs in a sequential fashion. And it's impossible to reverse this cycle. Once the cell division occurs, we cannot ask them to go back and check and correct the things. So 2 key classes of regulatory molecules. So 2 key classes of regulatory molecules are there: cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases. So CDKs. You have to remember the full form of all these things. Cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases are the key classes of regulatory molecules. They determine the cell's progress through the cell cycle. So here we have to remember the great people, Leland H. Hartwell and R. Timothy Hunt and Paul M. Nurse. They won the 2001 Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for the discovery of these central molecules. So the regulatory molecules, cyclins and cyclin-dependent kinases. It is by virtue of their relentless work in the lab, we are now studying all these things. So these are the great photographs of all these fellows. Paul M. Nurse and R. Timothy Hunt. 2 types of key regulators in the cell cycle in mammalian cells. Number 1, cyclins, the key regulator protein, and CDK, cyclin-dependent kinases, that is catalytic protein. So key regulatory protein is cyclin, and a catalytic protein subsequently acts as cyclin-dependent kinase. So besides these 2 key regulators, other regulators are also play a significant role in the cell cycle regulation, like RB protein, retinoblastoma protein, and P53 protein, tumor suppressor protein. So remember, cyclins, CDK, RB protein, P53 protein. These are the 4 things that will play key regulation roles. So cell cycle control systems, so it will be acting at places correctly at that place. So at the G1 phase, they will start acting. the CDK and G1 phase, and then it will go into S phase, there also CDK phase, and then at M phase again CDK, and at meta phase and anaphase also they will work. So CDK will be off by the time it crosses the anaphase. So many of the genes encoding cyclins and CDKs are conserved among all eukaryotes. So they are present right from the generations, but they are conserved among all the eukaryotes. In general, more complex organisms have more elaborate cell cycle control systems. So in analogy, we can try to understand when we are studying pre-KG, LKG, UKG, first standard, fifth standard, there will be less number of school teachers for us. As we go on to 10th standard intermediate, we will be having for each specialty, for each subject, there will be 2 or 3 teachers. Like that, many of the genes encoding cyclins and CDKs are conserved among all the eukaryotes. All the people will be present in every institution. But in general, more complex organisms will have more elaborate cell cycle control systems that incorporate more individual components in analogy with highly evolved institutions when compared to the small institutions. So many of the relevant genes were first identified by studying yeast. So yeast is the cell, simple cell that will grow fast and divide fast. And that's why the relevant genes were first identified by studying the yeast cell. So the yeast cell was studied by studied in Saccharomyces cerevisiae, that is the genetic nomenclature in yeast dubs. Dubs means small buds. So many of these genes, CDC, cell division cycle, CDC, will be given to that cell division cycle, CDC. Will be followed by an identifying number, CDC 25 or CDC 20. So whenever CDC comes, you have to understand that it is concerned with the cell division cycle. So cyclin-dependent kinases. The proline-directed serine specific protein kinases, they have 2 subunits, catalytic cycle, CDK, and positive regulatory cyclin stage. So protein kinases are enzymes that phosphorylate proteins using ATP. So the regulated activity of CDK is essential for the transitions from G1 to S form and from GT to M form phase. So, and for the entry of non-dividing cells into cell cycle. So the transition from G1 to S phase requires a set of cyclins that is called as G1 cyclins. So they are different from those required for the transition from G2 to mitosis, where mitotic cyclins activate the CDKs. So remember, G1 cyclins, they are the first cyclins, and then mitotic cyclins, they activate the second phase. So these are the 2 things in the first instance. So CDKs possesses 2 tyrosine phosphorylation sites. One causes activation of the enzyme, the other causes inactivation. So 2 sites will be there, both will be having tyrosine phosphorylation site, and one is concerned with the activation of the enzyme, and other causes inactivation of the enzyme. We should know where to end, isn't it? So specific kinases carry out both the stimulatory and inhibitory phosphorylations. So specific kinases should be available in this. So you can understand this. So G1 phase, S phase, G2 phase, M phase, at various phases, the cyclins D1, D2, D3, CDK 4 and 6. So 2 things together should complete the work. And then cyclin E1, E2 and CDK2. And cyclin A plus CDK2, cyclin A plus CDK1. So the role of CDK1 at that place is questionable, but as far as possible, the present research is concerned, it is taken for granted now. Cyclin B plus CDK1 at M phase and G2 phase, M phase. So 4 classes of cyclins are identified. Number 1, G1 cyclins. So what it does, it helps to promote passage through start or the restriction point to late G1 phase. So that is the limit of G1 cyclins. The G1 and S cyclins, they bind the CDKs at the end of G1 and commit the cell to DNA replication. So these are the specific actions of the cyclins, the 4 classes of cyclins. And then S cyclins binds the CDKs during S phase and are required for the initiation of DNA replication. And M cyclins promote the events of mitosis. The addition or removal of phosphate groups from CDKs is highly regulated, and an important mechanism for the control of cell cycle progression lies there only. The cyclin inhibitors play an important role in regulating the cell cycle in animals as well as in plants also. Very little is known about the plant cyclin inhibitors, whereas it's extensively known with animal cell, human beings. CDK activity can be regulated in various ways, but only 2 of the most important mechanisms are known to us, established. Number 1 is cyclin synthesis and destruction. Number 2 is phosphorylation and dephosphorylation of key amino acid residues within the CDK protein. So specific actions of cyclin CDK complexes. So cyclin D is the first cyclin produced in the cell. So A, B, C, D, D1 is the one that is the first cyclin. Even though in the order of identification they are named A, B, C, D, but the cyclin D is the first cyclin produced in the cells, and that enters the cell cycle in response to extracellular signals. The extracellular signals are in the form of growth factors, about which we will be studying in the next class. Its higher concentration is reported in G1 phase. So cyclin D concentration is very high in G1 phase, and that's why it's called as G1 cyclin. What it does, it binds with CDK2 enzyme and causes the activation of CDK2 by means of forming CDC2. So it helps in progression of cell cycle across G1 phase. Cyclin D levels stay very low in resting cells. When they are not proliferating, its need is not there, isn't it? Additionally, CDK4/6 and CDK2 are also inactive because CDK4 and 6 are bound by INK4 family members, that is P16 families. They limit the kinase activity. So these are the other information. At present, you have to remember only the first thing only. And then cyclin E. Cyclin E comes to play in late G1 S cyclin stage. So it is called as late G1 S cyclin. Cyclin E is termed as late G1 S cyclin. So its concentration begins to increase at the end of G1 phase, and it reaches at the peak during S phase. As the name indicates, it will start reaching the peak during S phase. So it binds with CDK4 and then forms an active CDC4. That is the combination form. So it allows the cell to progress from G1 phase to S phase. It causes activation of replicons in DNA. You know how the DNA progresses into division and all these things. So it causes activation of replicons in DNA, and thus the replicons become the ORI site, origin of replication, or replication bubble. You know pretty well, these are the standard short note questions in genetics. So ORI site, origin of replication or replication bubble. So what it does, it causes activation of replicons in DNA. Then cyclin A. So this is concerned with the G2 phase. So it increases its peak concentration at G2 phase and allows the cell cycle progression from G2 phase to M phase. So what it does, it activates CDK1 to CDC1. Then cyclin B, mitotic cyclin. Cyclin B is otherwise known as mitotic cyclin. It's a popular short note question in university exam. Cyclin B is otherwise known as mitotic cyclin. It increases at peak during metaphase stage of the cell cycle and it causes progression of cell from metaphase to anaphase by means of activating CDK20, and that's why it forms CDC20 at that stage. CDC20, I told you this number 20 and all these things. CDC20 binds with APC, thus APC gets activated. Almost all cyclin proteins begins to synthesize in G1 phase, and they reaches their peak in different stages of cell cycle, while their concentrations suddenly fall during the anaphase. That is the end of it. The function is over. Cyclin E is reported to be present in nearly constant concentrations from their synthesis till anaphase. So that means cyclin E is the long-lived cyclin protein. So this is a multiple choice question. Cyclin E is a long-lived cyclin protein. So the researchers believe that it is due to the proper folding of N-terminal of cyclin E, which is not freely accessible to E3 enzymes till the half-life is achieved. And you have to know about this RB protein, retinoblastoma protein. So retinoblastoma protein is the tumor suppressor protein first discovered in patients suffering from retinoblastoma. That's why it is named as RB, retinoblastoma protein. Retinoblastoma is a tumor of the retina of the eye that occurs due to mutation in the retinoblastoma gene. So when the mutation in the retinoblastoma gene takes place, mutant retinoblastoma proteins will form from that gene. So that is the problem, actual problem. So retinoblastoma is a tumor suppressor gene actually, and its product is called retinoblastoma protein that prevents the cell to migrate from G1 to S phase. So that's why RB protein acts as a brake for cell cycle progression from G1 phase. Again, there is another protein, guardian of genome, P53 protein. It's a short note question. A protein of 53 kilodaltons coded by a gene that is called as P53 gene or TP53 gene. So what it does, it acts to maintain the genome integrity of organism because it pushes the cell towards apoptosis at any stage of cell cycle when a cell has DNA damage. So when DNA is damaged, it doesn't want a damaged daughter cells. So it will just push the cell into apoptosis. Thereby the cell will disintegrate and die, that's all. So there will be no more crop of disinterested small cells. So the cell cycle will be ending up there. So what it will act, that guardian of genome, what it does, it acts to maintain the genome integrity of organism. It will not allow to break down the integrity of the organism. It pushes the cell towards apoptosis at any stage of cell cycle when a cell has DNA damage. With the DNA damage, it doesn't want to go and create damaged daughter cells. So in this regard, P53 is called as the guardian of genome and the main tumor suppressor gene. And the role of P53 in healthy and tumor cells, in healthy cells, P53 get polyubiquitinized and degraded by 26S proteasome. You know the small proteasomes, 26X proteasome. So regulation checkpoints of cell cycle we have to remember. Although the cell cycle is regulated at all stages of its progression, at some steps of cell cycle, it is tightly regulated. So the tightly regulated checkpoints are called as checkpoints or transition points. So you'll have uninhibitory progression from first standard to 10th standard. At 10th standard, you will have a checkpoint. And then in +2, at the end of 2 years, you'll have a checkpoint. And when you enter the MBBS professional courses, at the end of first year, checkpoint. At the end of second year, checkpoint. At the end of third year, there will be no checkpoint, you'll be promoted. Finally, when you clear all the ENT ophthalmology, community medicine, medicine surgery, gynec, orthopedics, and pediatrics, you will be declared possessing the MBBS degree, isn't it? In the same manner, in the cell cycle also, there are checkpoints, and these checkpoints are tightly regulated. So tightly regulated checkpoints are called checkpoints or transition points. So the three main transition checkpoints in cell cycle are located in G1 to S phase, one checkpoint. G2 to M3 is one checkpoint, and metaphase to anaphase is another checkpoint. You have to remember only these three main transition checkpoints in cell cycle. This is the thing. So G2, G1, G3 checkpoints are located like this. G1 to S transition checkpoint. G1 to S transition checkpoint is known as start in yeast, and the restriction point is the name given to this checkpoint in mammals. In yeast, when it is first identified, they named it as start. And when we identified the same thing in mammals, we called it as restriction point. So for transition, the cell requires active E2F. E2F is activated by cyclin D CDK complex. The complex should activate the E2F. And in the absence of cyclin D, cell quit from cell division. When there is no cyclin D, the cell will not venture to go into cell division, and it will come back and enter the G3 phase. Something is defective. That's why it wants to acquire more and more and grow correctly. So in the absence of cyclin D, the cell quit from the cell division and enter into G0 phase. If active E2F is available in the cell, it enters the nucleus and activates the genes for replication initiation. So this is the tight checkpoint. And now apoptosis, most important. So when all the old people are dying down and leaving their footprints on the sands of time, you youngsters will be taking the footprints and follow it up for your progressive growth and development to occupy a few pages of science in the history. So apoptosis is nothing but cell death, programmed cell death. Apoptosis is a form of programmed cell death that occurs in multicellular organisms. And biochemical events that lead to the characteristic cell changes and death are comprehensively known as apoptosis. So there is a German scientist, Karl Wahr. He was the first one to describe the principle of apoptosis in 1842. And later on, after nearly some 55 years, the 2002 Nobel Prize in Medicine was awarded to Sidney Brenner, Howard and John E. Sulston for their work identifying the genes that control apoptosis. And the genes were first identified by studies in a small nematode, and that nematode is almost indistinct. We cannot commonly identify that nematode every day in our day-to-day life. So that was identified in C. elegans, a nematode. The name of that is C. elegans. And the homologous of these genes function in humans to regulate apoptosis. So by word, the C. elegans means Caenorhabditis elegans. It's a free living nematode of wonderfully 1 millimeter length. So where it lives? Not in our human body. It lives in temperate soil environment. So in temperate countries like our country, they live in soil. So they don't live in the human body. It's after all 1 millimeter length. It's very difficult to identify it. 1 millimeter is nothing. With bare eye, it's very difficult sometimes to identify it. So it mostly the Caenorhabditis elegans is hermaphrodite. But occasionally male population also will be seen with special spicules. The respiratory spicules will be characteristically present in the male Caenorhabditis elegans. So it lacks respiratory or circulatory system. Very prototype of nematode. So in 1963, Sidney Brenner proposed a research for neuronal development. That is the proposal from Sidney Brenner in 1963. what intention he got is, he tried to utilize it for mitotic chromosomes, DNA, cytokines, kinetochores, and sister genetic molecule studies, and regulation and execution of cytokinesis and apoptosis, and all these things. When simply he started, he wanted to use it for neuronal development study. But later on, all these areas came into work. So that's the greatness of small beginning, ending up in great result. So he is this great man, John E. Sulston, along with Brenner. So apoptosis means biochemical changes during apoptosis include the 6 characteristic ones. First one is blubbing. Second one is cell shrinkage. Third one is nuclear fragmentation. And the fourth one is chromatin condensation. And fifth one is chromosomal DNA fragmentation. And finally, mRNA decay. So as long as mRNA is there, protein biosynthesis will be going on unhindered. When mRNA decays, then everything stops. Thereby apoptosis will be complete. So the average adult human loses about 50 and 70 billion cells every day due to apoptosis. Remember what all the cells that we are seeing, that we are not seeing under the skin or in the muscle and the body, they are not forever green. So we are losing every day. Average adult human loses between 50 and 70 billion cells every day due to programmed cell death. It's a programmed cell death. It's not hacking with a knife, whoever comes ahead, killing and all. That's not will be there. So it will be a programmed cell death. So whichever the cell feels that it should be taken out, it should be done. So the average adult human loses 50 to 70 billion cells every day due to apoptosis. For an average human child between the age of 18 to 14, approximately 20 to 30 billion cells die per day. So remember, for average human child between 8 to 14 years of age, the child may be losing 20 to 30 billions. Whereas when he grows up to your and our age, beyond 18 years and 20 years, so there will be loss between 50 to 70 billion cells every day. That's why we need all the cells to again grow up. And necrosis is a form of cell injury which results in the premature death of cells in living tissues by autolysis. So there is a difference between programmed cell death, apoptosis, and necrosis. So necrosis is a form of cell injury that's different from apoptosis. Apoptosis is a programmed cell death, whereas necrosis is the form of cell injury that results in a premature death of cells in living tissues by autolysis. The cell will be automatically getting lysed, getting liquidated, getting stopping of all the work. So necrosis is caused by factors external to the cell or tissues. Like in infections, we will have a lot of autolysis of the tissues, and the action of toxins will cause a lot of autolysis or death. And trauma, whenever an injury is subjected to injury, tissues will go into autolysis. So they result in unregulated digestion of cell components. So in contrast, apoptosis is a naturally occurring programmed and targeted cause of cellular death. So this is more programmed one, whereas necrosis is not a programmed one, unexpected one. So while apoptosis often provides beneficial effects to the organism, necrosis is almost always detrimental and can be fatal to the organism. So this is the simple depiction between necrosis and apoptosis. We come to the apoptosis first. A normal cell is there with nucleus and organelles, and a normal cell will, when it is decided to undergo apoptosis, it first develops blebs. So small blebs form. So then the nucleus begins to break apart and the DNA breaks into small pieces. and the organelles also will be located in the blebs. So they will be directed towards the blebs. And the cell breaks into several apoptotic bodies. And the organelles are also still functioning, but they will be encircled in the blebs. So that will be the apoptotic picture. And whereas in the necrosis picture, the necrosis also, whenever the trauma or toxin or infection, all these things subject the cell, then the blebs also will form. So small blebs form, the structure of the nucleus start changing. So it will not be regular. So the blebs fuse and become much larger. And no organelles will be distributed into the blebs. That's the characteristic difference between necrosis and apoptosis. In apoptosis, all the organelles will migrate into that, whereas in the necrosis, no organelles will migrate into the blebs. And then final stage is necrosis. Cell membrane will rupture and release the cell content, and all the organelles become non-functional. They are dead. So that leads to ultimate necrosis. Now we have to know about the activation mechanisms. The initiation of apoptosis is tightly regulated by activation mechanisms. Because once apoptosis has begun, it inevitably leads to the death of the cell. That's why there should be a very activation mechanism should be there at all stages to regulate tightly. So the two best understood activation mechanisms are intrinsic pathway and extrinsic pathway. Intrinsic pathway is also called as mitochondrial pathway, and then next comes the extrinsic pathway. So two pathways you should be very clearly understanding. The intrinsic pathway is activated by intracellular signals. These intracellular signals will be generated when cells are stressed, and then they depend on the release of proteins from the intermembrane space of mitochondria. Remember, it is the intermembrane space of mitochondria. So remember, mitochondria is ultimately the caretaker of the pathway for apoptosis also. So the extrinsic pathway is activated by extracellular ligands binding to cell surface, and that is known as death receptors. So it will lead to the formation of death-inducing signaling complex, that's known as DISC, DISC. So remember, the full form is death-inducing signaling complex, DISC, DISC. Intrinsic mitochondrial pathway is the first one. So during apoptosis, cytochrome C is released from mitochondria through the action of the proteins BAX and BAK. So remember, these are all the small abbreviations for the signaling ones. So the cytochrome C is released from the mitochondria whenever BAX and BAK are acting upon the mitochondria. Until then, it will not release the cytochrome. So they may cause mitochondrial swelling. So initially, when the BAX and BAK start action, the mitochondria will swell through formation of membrane pores. So, or what will happen? They may increase the permeability of the mitochondrial membrane and cause apoptotic effectors to leak out. So when the increased mitochondrial permeability with release of pro-apoptotic molecules into cytoplasm, that is the cytochrome C comes, then synthesis of anti-apoptotic molecules, BCL2, promotes, that is promoted by the release of growth factors. So now second pathway is intrinsic mitochondrial pathway. So when the cells are deprived of growth factors or subjected to stress, anti-apoptotic molecules like BCL2 are lost. BCL2 is overexpressed in most follicular B-cell lymphomas. So follicular lymphomas will show overexpression of BCL2. So this will allow the abnormal cells to proliferate. So mitochondrial membrane becomes permeable and proteins that activate capsases So capsase is the one that will get activated when the mitochondrial membrane is permeable and the proteins enter, and the capsase will leak out. So once cytochrome C is released, it binds with apoptotic protease activating factor 1, that is abbreviated as APAF1. Apoptotic protease activating factor 1 is abbreviated as APAF1 and ATP. Then it will bind to the procapsase 9 to create a protein complex known as apoptosome. This is a short note question. What do you mean by apoptosome? It is the combination. It's a protein complex, apoptosome. But once the cytochrome C is released, it binds with apoptotic protease activating factor, APAF1 and ATP, and then binds to procapsase 9 to create a protein complex. And this complex ultimately is known as apoptosome. So apoptosome cleaves the procapsase to its active form of caspase 9. And this caspase 9 in turn cleaves and activates procaspase into the effector capsase 3. So remember this 9-3 naming. This is the simple thing you can remember. So by DNA damage, it will slowly enter, and then the death receptor first will add the ligand there, and then FAD and FAD on two sides it will create the capsase seed, and then it will go into capsase 9 and 7, 2, 3, 10, 6 and capsase 8. So DNA damage or other subcellular stimulus is the first one that targets the mitochondrial membrane porosity. The pores will develop in the mitochondrial membrane and cytochrome C will come out, and that will trigger all the subsequent steps of cell death. Now, extrinsic pathway, there are two theories of direct initiation of apoptotic mechanisms in mammals. That is TNF induced tumor necrosis factor model and FAS ligand mediated model. Both will be involving receptors of TNF receptor, TNFR. TNF receptor is otherwise abbreviated as TNFR. And TNFR family coupled to extrinsic signals. TNF pathway. So TNF alpha is a cytokine produced mainly by activated macrophages. And it is the major extrinsic mediator of apoptosis. So most cells in human body have two receptors for TNF alpha, that is TNFR1 and TNFR2. The beginning of TNF alpha, the binding of TNF alpha to TNFR1, that is shown to initiate the pathway. So when the binding of TNF alpha to TNFR1, receptor 1, takes place, then it shows the initiation of pathway that leads to capsase activation via the intermediate membrane proteins. So the TNF receptor associated death domain, TRAD, and the FAS associated death domain protein, FRAD. So CLAP1 or 2 can inhibit TNF alpha signaling by binding to TRAF2. FLIP inhibits the activation of capsase 8. So these are all the areas where the control points are there for cell apoptosis. So activation, inactivation. So inactivated TFN-R1, then TFN binds to the receptor, and then it will enter the TRAD, and then FAD will undergo it into FAD, and then finally procapsase 8. That is the stage where the cell starts apoptosis. So capsase activation will take place, and finally apoptosis will take place. So for the apoptosis to initiate, the formation of procapsase 8 should be facilitated. That's where I have shown in this picture. Capsase 8 ultimately is the one where it leads to the apoptosis. And TNF path Binding of this receptor can also indirectly lead to the activation of transcription factors involved in cell survival and inflammatory responses. So this is a double-edged knife. But all said and done, signaling through TNF-R1 might also induce apoptosis in a capsase-independent manner. So the link between TNF-alpha and apoptosis shows why an abnormal production of TNF-alpha plays a fundamental role in several human diseases, especially more so with autoimmune diseases. This is quite true. So remember, when you grow into knowledgeable doctors and doing a lot of research in genetic engineering and cancer, you should be remembering all these things, and your small professors and teachers in your first year of MBBS. Then you will become a very great individual of so many vocabulary in cancer and genetic engineering. Then you will automatically forget all of us. But don't forget these basic things. So FAS path, the FAS receptor, first apoptosis signal, that is the abbreviation. The FAS means first apoptosis signal. So it's known as APO1 or CD95. It's a transmembrane protein of the TNF family that binds the FAS ligand, that is known as FASL, FAS ligand. So the interaction between FAS and FAS ligand results in the formation of death-inducing signaling complex disc that contains FADD, capsase 8 and capsase 10. That is the final tag that should definitely have. So death-inducing signaling complex DISC should contain a FAD, capsase 8 and capsase 10. In some types of cells, that is the type 1 cells, their processed capsase 8 directly activates other members of the capsase family and triggers the execution of apoptosis in the cell. Sometimes it is more complex, sometimes it is very simple. So apoptotic cell disassembly is most important thing, represented in a diagram like this. So the apoptotic cell starts, the nuclear content will be the blebs will be forming on the nuclear membrane, and the small surface membrane blebs will be forming on the cell membrane, and then nucleus will undergo fragmentation. Nuclear fragmentation will take place, and large dynamic membrane blebs will be seen at that stage when the nuclear fragmentation starts. And then microtubule spikes will form, and apoptopodia will be start giving rise, and beaded apoptopodia is the other signal. When we find the apoptopodia, beaded apoptopodia and microtubule spikes, then it's almost a thing to blast. So protrusion elongation will take place, and segmentation of elongated protrusion will take place, and beaded apoptopodia will burst into apoptotic bodies. So this is the completion of cell fragmentation at stage 3. So step 1, step 2 and step 3. Step 1 is the apoptotic cell will start nuclear content fragmenting, and blebs will be forming, and the cell membrane also starts a small blebbing, and the small surface membrane blebs completely, clearly, and nuclear fragmentation takes place, and the large dynamic membrane blebs will be locating the nuclear fragments. And there ends the step 1, and it enters the step 2. And here in the step 2, the apoptopodia will form, beaded apoptopodia will be there, microtubule spikes will be there, and all the nuclear small nuclear fragments will be migrating into the microtubule spikes, and the protrusion will elongate, and finally in step 3, cell will go into fragmentation. So the protrusion elongation will take place, segmentation of the elongated protrusion will take place, beaded apoptopodia will be bursting into apoptotic bodies. So this is again the represented phagocyte engulfs all the apoptotic bodies. So apoptosis in pathological conditions, that is the thing with which we are concerned. So ionizing radiations will lead to apoptosis in pathological condition. For all practical purposes, we came to know that apoptosis is a physiological condition. So most of the cells, 15 to 20 million cells in small children, and 60 to 80 million cells in adults, should go on to apoptosis. That is natural. But in pathological conditions, apoptosis will be induced by ionizing radiations, cytotoxic chemotherapeutic drugs, the drugs that we use especially in cancer treatment, and mild thermal injuries. So when we are subjected to heat, we are subjected to mild thermal injury. So it will not be 50 degrees, 70 degrees like that. So even if it is a mild thermal injury, it will cause pathological apoptosis. And cell injury in some viral diseases also will be leading to apoptosis. And pathological atrophy after duct obstruction. When the duct obstruction takes place, there will be pathological atrophy in cells. And cell death in tumors. And glucocorticoids induce apoptosis in lymphocytes. Suppose if we take a lot of glucocorticoids, that is corticosteroids. So that will be immunosuppressant, that will be acting like immunosuppressant. And for most of the initial stages of dangerously progressing reaction, the glucocorticoids will come to the help to suddenly stop the immune complexes. So immunosuppression will be taking place with glucocorticoids. That's why the people on prolonged use of glucocorticoids will have less of the immunity. So we should not unnecessarily take the glucocorticoids when once it is prescribed for some or other reason, real reason, of course, by some doctor at some place, and without going back for the corrections, we should not go on taking it in the pharmacy. So now we come to know about the mutagens. So in genetics, mutagen is a physical or chemical agent that changes the genetic material. Usually the genetic material is DNA of an organism and thus increases the frequency of mutations. So a mutation is an alteration in the nucleotide sequence of the genome of an organism, virus or extra chromosomal DNA, anything. Suppose we are now what we are, but we do not know in old generations of our grand old parents what type of viruses entered and damaged the genes of our grandparents, and we do not know what type of the damaged gene we are entertaining in our present body. So all these things you have to know. So history. In 1901, Hugo de Vries is the geneticist. He gave the name mutation to seemingly new forms that suddenly arose in the experiments on evening primrose plant. So evening primrose plant is extensively present in roadsides. You can see Oninthera lamarckiana. It is having a very good aromatic smell also. There will be glabrous, hairy appearance on the undersurface of the leaf, and there will be white evening primrose plants should be there. The red evening primrose flowers should be there. Yellow evening primrose flowers should be there. All these things were observed in the first decade of the 20th century. Mutationalism, that is the name given by the de Vries for mutation theory. So the first mutagens to be identified were carcinogens. So the carcinogens are substances that were shown to be linked to cancer. So tumors were described more than 2000 years before the discovery of chromosomes and DNA. In 500 BC, the Greek physician Hippocrates named tumors resembling a crab, carcino, from which the word cancer. So canker, carcino, all these are the words related to the Greek literature. So carcinos That is, the word cancer is derived through Latin. That is, meaning is crab. Even till now, we use the crab symbol to demarcate the cancer. 2017 study claimed that 66% of cancer-causing mutations are random, and 29% are due to environment. The studied population spanned around 69 countries, and ultimately they concluded that 66% of cancer-causing mutations are random. We do not know. And 29% are due to environment, and 5% are inherited definitely. Humans, on average, pass 60 new mutations to their children, but fathers pass more mutations depending on their age. That's why when we marry at an advanced age, we are passing a large number of mutations to our children. So fathers pass more mutations depending on their age, with every year adding to 2 new mutations to the child. So remember how detrimental to marry a man who is having an advanced age. By no means we should go for marrying a man with advanced age. So it doesn't matter even if we marry a man with lesser age than us, but it's very detrimental to marry a man with advanced age. So this is the simple rationale why we should not marry like that. So humans on average pass 60 new mutations to their children, but the fathers pass more mutations depending on their age, with every year adding to 2 new mutations to the child. That is so dangerous. Now the types of mutations. There are 4 classes of mutations. One is spontaneous mutation, that is molecular decay. Second one is mutations due to error-prone replication bypass of naturally occurring DNA damage. This is also called as error-prone translation synthesis. And third one is errors introduced during DNA repair. And fourth one is induced mutations caused by mutagens. So these are the types of mutations. You'll be knowing all these things in your intermediate. And again in MBBS, various types of mutations are told to you. Point mutations, frame shift mutations, transition, transversion are included in the point mutations. Insertions and deletions are included in the frame shift mutation. So all these things you know pretty well. So types of mutagens we are concerned mostly in this class. So mutagens may be physical, chemical, or biological of origin. So they may act directly on DNA, causing direct damage to the DNA, and most often they result in replication error. So some, however, may act on the replication mechanism itself, and chromosomal partition also will be affected by this replication error. So many of the mutagens are not mutagenic by themselves, but can form mutagenic metabolites through cellular processes. For example, through the activity of cytochrome P450 system and other oxygenases like cyclooxygenases, the mutagens will be going on into dangerous condition. So such mutagens, initially they are called as pro-mutagens. So ionizing radiations like X-rays, gamma rays, alpha particles, they cause DNA breakage and they cause damages in the DNA. The most common lab sources include cobalt-60 and cesium-137. These are the 2 most common lab sources for physical mutagens. Ultraviolet radiations, you know pretty well. The wavelength above 260 nanometers are absorbed strongly by bases, producing pyrimidine dimers. And pyrimidine dimers can cause error in the replication if it is left uncorrected in the second generation. And most of the times it goes without any correction. So radioactive decay, like carbon-14 in DNA, that will decay into nitrogen. So DNA reactive chemicals are there. We know pretty well about reactive oxygen species, ROS. So they may be superoxide hydroxyl radicals, hydrogen peroxides, and large number of highly reactive species are generated by normal cellular processes inside our body, even without any interaction by others. So as a byproduct of mitochondrial electron transport or due to lipid peroxidation, so many of these reactive oxygen species will be formed inside our body. A number of mutagens may also generate this reactive oxygen species, and the reactive oxygen species may result in the production of the base adducts as well as DNA strand breaks and cross links. So I am stressing these words. Please try to understand the importance of these words. So what these ROS will result? They will result in the production of base adducts, DNA strand breaks, and cross links. These are the fundamental problems. So deaminating agents, for example, nitrous acid, that will cause transition mutation by converting cytosine to uracil. That's why in good olden days, not in good olden days, even nowadays also, our elders in the house will forbid us not to go into rains when the thunderstorms are taking place. It's not only due to electrocution or unnecessarily dying. So all the nitrous acid will be forming when the nascent nitric oxide will be slowly diluting in the rainwater, and they will be falling on the skin. They will be drinking it, they will be inhaling it, and everything will take place. So the deaminating agents are notoriously present in nitrous acid. So that will cause transition mutation by converting cytosine to uracil. Especially, even though the male children are very troubleshooters, they'll just allow, go, whatever you do it. But they'll prohibit the female children to go into the rainy water to have a nice time. So they'll prevent them to go into the rainwater. So what will happen? It will unnecessarily cause the transition mutations by converting cytosine to uracil. So DNA reactive chemicals, the third one is polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. You know pretty well about this PAH, right from your 10th standard and intermediate. So when the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are activated to diol epoxides, they can bind to DNA and form adducts. And the fourth one is alkylating agents. Ethyl nitrosourea is one alkylating agent, and they transfer methyl or ethyl group to the bases or to the backbone of phosphate groups in the DNA. And the fifth one is alkaloid from plants. Vinca rosea is a famous plant that all of us know. They'll be having white flowers and pink flowers. So Vinca species. So they'll be converted by metabolic processes into active mutagen or carcinogen, and that is the process by which they'll be acting upon the blood cancers, myeloid leukemia, lymphocytic leukemia. So bromine and some other compounds that contain bromine in their chemical structure will be also detrimental. That's why the bromine containing sweets are prohibited in our country. So we are no more using it. And even in the labs also, while we are breaking a bromine ampoule, we take ample precautions. We should not expose the senior lab technician or junior lab technician in the laboratories to get exposed to the bromine vapors. So it explodes to a great extent and causes release of so many bromine vapors, the brown color bromine vapors into the lab. So we have to keep a distance to all these things. So sodium azide is an azide salt that's common reagent to organic synthesis, and it's a component in car airbag systems. So when car airbag blasts, sodium azide will come back, and sodium azide will be added on to the mutton and other things when we put it in packets. So DNA chemicals are aromatic amines. So the amides and amines, they'll be associated with carcinogenesis. And since 1895, Ludwig Rahn observed high incidence of bladder cancer in the workers. They are working in German synthetic aromatic amine dye industries, and 2-acetyl-aminofluorine is originally used as a pesticide, but may also form a found in the cooked meat, and it will cause cancers of the bladder, liver, ear, intestine, thyroid, and breast. So the types of mutagens, base analogs, they can substitute for DNA bases during replication and cause transition mutations. And intercalating agents, ethidium bromide that you know about protein biosynthesis, and proflavin. Proflavin is extensively present in turmeric. And these are the molecules that may insert between bases in DNA. And sometimes the people using turmeric powder for worshipping gods may develop ulcers on this finger. In such incidences, we ask them to use a thimble, silver thimble, instead of directly handling the kumkum and the turmeric. So they create frame shift mutations during the replication, and some such as danorubicin. These things may block the transcription and replication, and that's why danorubicin is highly toxic for proliferating cells, and we use it for treatment of cancer. So we will go into the types of mutagens. Many of the metals like arsenic, cadmium, chromium, nickel, and the compounds of these metals will be mutagenic. They may be associated with the production of oxygen reactive species, and some of these will have DNA replication also will be breaking down due to them. They may be linked to the DNA hypermethylation and histone deacetylation, and they affect the DNA repair process like DNA mismatch repair and the base nucleotide excision repair. Both of these repairs will be lost. And the biological agents like transposon, deletion of DNA that automatically undergoes autonomous fragment relocation multiplication. And the virus DNA may be inserted into the genome and disrupts genetic function. So this was suggested to cause cancer as early as 1908 by Wilhelm Ellerman and Alf Bang. And in 1911 by Patton Roos. He discovered the Roos sarcoma virus, and in some cases bacteria. Some bacteria like Helicobacter pylori that would be present in the pyloric antrum, the pyloric wall, under the walls of pyloric antrum. Large number of millions and millions of Helicobacter pylori will be present in human beings. And if they are allowed to progress like that, they will be unnecessarily going into inflammatory processes. Oxidative species are produced. They will cause DNA damage and causes cancer. That's why we are using promptly the Helicobacter pylori should be arrested by using the kit. So chemical carcinogen is genotoxic, chromosomic action will be there, DNA reactive species will be there, the weak genotoxic one, borderline one, and initiate ones will be there, non-genotoxic also will be there. So in 1972, R.J. Hubner and Todaro suggested that mutations or genetic rearrangements of proto-oncogenes by carcinogens or viruses may alter the normally regulated function of the genes, converting them into potent cancer-causing oncogenes. So various chemicals like DNA alkylating agents, UV ultraviolet rays and ionizing radiations, they all are causing all these things. So at least two distinct phases, initiation phase and promotion phase. So the initiation involves changes in the genome, but not in itself leading to the malignant transformation. After initiation, the promoters will stimulate the cell division and lead to the malignant transformation. So the first evidence that oncogenes alone could induce malignant transformation came from the studies of VSRC oncogenes from Rous sarcoma virus, with which we are very much conversant in the previous class. Thank you.